in 1993, I went to Manaus, which is the capital of Amazonia in Brazil, and we were invited by a syncretic church in Brazil that has legal sanction to use ayahuasca as a psychoactive sacrament in their religious ceremonies. We were invited by them to study their members, or to include them as research subjects in a research study we had put together. So my colleagues were Dennis McKenna from the United States, Jace Calloway, who is at the University of Kuopio in Finland, and also Glaucus de Souza Brito, a Brazilian doctor. And we we went to Manaus in 1993. We spent about a month there and studied 15, we randomly selected 15 members of the Unidade Vegetal, or the UDV, that had been using ayahuasca at least twice monthly in ceremony for at least 10 years. And we also studied 15 matched controls who had never used ayahuasca. We did baseline studies of each group, including medical assessments and psychiatric assessments. Psychiatric assessments included personality testing and neuropsychological testing. For the ayahuasca using subjects, we also had for each of them an experimental ayahuasca session where each in turn was administered ayahuasca by a maestri, or a minister of the religion, and we had an indwelling intravenous catheter. We took bloods every 20 minutes for 6 hours, and we took blood pressure measurements every 30 minutes, and heart rate, and pupillary diameter, and we had EKGs of the subjects to study the acute medical effects of the ayahuasca administration. We also, after the session was over, each of the subjects filled out a questionnaire, which was the hallucinogen rating scale, which is looking at the intrasubjective phenomenological effects of the ayahuasca. And also, on another occasion, with each of the ayahuasca subjects, I conducted lengthy life story interviews with them. So that was basically the study. And we had all the data analyzed, and we published our findings in several different medical, psychiatric, and neuroscience journals.
Tell me about your findings.
Well, we found, first of all, that the ayahuasca subjects who had used ayahuasca within the context of the UDV for at least 10 years, that they were all in very good medical condition and good psychological condition. I should also say that with each of the groups, we did structured psychiatric diagnostic interviews. And there we found that whereas with the UDV ayahuasca using subjects, many of them had past histories of alcohol abuse, drug abuse, sociopathic behaviors. All of these had entirely remitted or disappeared since their participation in ayahuasca ceremony in the UDV.
I'm sorry, UDV stands for?
União de Vegetal, which is translated as Union of the Plants.
Okay.
União, UNIAO, D-O, Vegetal, VEGETAL. So I abbreviated UDV, or that's how they abbreviated, the UDV. Mm-hmm. And they have had permission in Brazil since 1987 to use ayahuasca within the context of their religious ceremonies.
So this ayahuasca was used with these members of the UDV that you were finding, was used as a therapy, or
no. It was a psychoactive sacrament.
But the symptoms disappear.
The alcoholism entirely disappeared. They stopped drinking. They stopped using drugs. They stopped engaging in antisocial behaviors. It was quite dramatic what we saw.
Wow! Did you find out how did it work? Why?
Well, it's a great mystery. They had powerful psychospiritual experiences. They had powerful epiphanies, tremendous insight, realization. For instance, I asked in the life story interviews, I asked each of the subjects to describe for me how they came to the UDV and what they experienced during their very first ayahuasca ceremony. And there was a consistent theme, which was particularly for the subjects who were very dysfunctional with, bad behaviors, antisocial behaviors, drug and alcohol abuse. The theme was that they had a vision of themselves out of control. One man had a vision that he was in a canoe going down the great river, and he was in the rapids, and the canoe was out of control, and he knew that he would die. We had another man who was at an amusement park on a Ferris wheel, and suddenly the wheel started spinning out of control. Stories like that. And in each occasion they had an experience of the founder of the UDV coming, in a sense, to their rescue. And they realized that this was really metaphorical for their lives were out of control. They would kill themselves if they did not radically change, radically alter their attitude towards their lives. And they all joined the UDV, became members, and really transformed in many respects. They went from often being quite dysfunctional to, over time, becoming successful out in the world, becoming pillars of the local society, and stopping their addictive behaviors, stopping their violent behaviors. Many of them had been very irresponsible within their family systems. They transformed in those regards also, and became highly responsible, and became very, very they maintained very high standards in regards to being spouses or parents or employers or what have you. However they would interact with people in the world, whether family or at work or friends, their standards of conduct improved tremendously. And it appears what had happened was that they had a profound religious conversion. Now, you'll hear of religious conversions in all religions, and you'll hear of improved standards of conduct when individuals go through a religious conversion. What's unique about the UDV is that they use a very powerful plant hallucinogen decoction as a psychoactive sacrament during their religious ceremonies, and that, in my opinion, appeared to augment or amplify the likelihood of their having a powerful, transformative, religious or spiritual experience.
Was there any subject, any person that had something like autism or schizophrenia or
none of our subjects
psychotics
had autism or schizophrenia. None of our subjects had bipolar disorder. Several of our subjects had severe major depression and anxiety disorders. I did meet, though, a man who, he was not a subject in the study, but he was a member of the UDV. This is a man with severe bipolar disorder who had been treated for many years with lithium and other medications. And he became a member of the UDV and did very well. And after his entree into the UDV and his participation in twice-monthly ayahuasca ceremony, he no longer needed any hospitalizations, and he still took lithium, but a lower dose.
Besides the realizations and the insight, I mean the behavior, chemically, do you think that what is happening with this?
So we know that the active hallucinogen in ayahuasca is DMT, or dimethyltryptamine. Dimethyltryptamine, the chemical structure of dimethyltryptamine is very, very similar to the endogenous neurotransmitter serotonin. Serotonin is 5-hydroxytryptamine. The DMT, the hallucinogen in ayahuasca, is N,N-dimethyltryptamine. So it's very close with the chemical structure. And we know that hallucinogens, including DMT or psilocybin, which is the active alkaloid in hallucinogenic mushrooms, which is from another study I've done. That's 4-phosphoryloxy N,N-dimethyltryptamine. These compounds are structurally very close with serotonin, and they affect the serotonin receptors in the central nervous system, specifically the serotonin 2A, 2C, and 1A receptors. And we don't know exactly what's going on, but we know that it's the interaction of the stimulation of these particular receptors which seem to induce, from a biological perspective, the visionary experience that occurs.
So that I'm thinking, for instance, in regards of autism, there is a treatment that is serotonin for children and all that. I think so, right?
Well, there's no effective treatment for autism per se. We have no treatments for autism. We have treatments for the behavioral problems that can occur, like mood disorders or aggression or attentional problems. Although I will say, that being said, that in the late 1950s and early 1960s, several psychiatric investigators looked at the use of hallucinogens to actually treat autism. And although the research methodological standards from 50 years ago were very primitive compared to today, and we cannot draw any definitive conclusions, still, these investigators reported cases of young people who by today's standards probably were autistic, although in the standards from 1960 they were considered childhood schizophrenic. But some of these kids improved quite dramatically according to the investigators who wrote about them.
So is there any investigation or anything in this matter?
Not currently. My research coordinator, whose name is Alicia Danforth, who worked with me on the psilocybin study, is now a graduate student in psychology writing a thesis on the theoretical rationale for using a hallucinogen treatment model to treat autistic spectrum disturbance. But this is all theoretical at this point, and we are interested in perhaps trying to develop a study, but it would not be with children. Rather, it would be with young adults who are high-functioning autistics or young adults with Asperger's disorder. And why we say adults and not children is entirely for political reasons. It would not be possible to get permission to work with children until one works with adults.
Brazil, they were doing these ceremonies with adolescents and with children too, or mainly with adolescents?
Right, okay. In the early 2000s, we did another study in Brazil. This was in Sao Paulo and Brasilia, with the adolescent children of adult members of the UDV. The background for this was that in the late 90s, the Brazilian judiciary requested an evaluation of the psychological health of the young people who participated with their parents in the religious ceremonies of the UDV. Within the UDV, we learned that women, when they are pregnant, will participate in ayahuasca ceremonies. They feel the ayahuasca has very salutary or healthy effects. They also, some of them at least, describe taking ayahuasca during childbirth itself. And I was present at baptisms where little babies are baptized with an eyedropper full of ayahuasca. But then the children do not participate or take ayahuasca in ceremony throughout childhood. Once they go through puberty and are in their adolescence, they have an option of joining their parents for religious ceremonies. And these were the kids we studied. We studied, I think it was 45 kids who had participated in ayahuasca ceremony and 45 matched controls. And we found the kids of the UDV who had ayahuasca experience always within religious context, never ever recreational. That goes for the adults as well. It's only taken in group religious ceremony. We found these kids were very high functioning. They scored well on the neuropsychological testing. They did not harbor, much at all in the way of psychopathology. The likelihood of their experimenting with alcohol or drugs of abuse, which, as we know, is very common in adolescence, it was their frequency of use was much lower than the non-ayahuasca exposed controls. In fact, one of my colleagues, a medical colleague in Brazil, once said that he believed that the adolescent participation in these religious ceremonies using ayahuasca prophylaxes them against becoming drug abusers or alcohol abusers.
How old were they?
These kids range from about, as I recall, from about 15 to 19. Well, sometimes, not often, but sometimes people will report that they hear a particular sounds during a session, kind of a high vibratory pitch. Some have likened it to almost like insectoid sounds. And what it signifies, I really don't know, but I've heard that reported.
How do you think that the chanting works in ayahuasca?
Well, certainly there's kind of a certain, first of all, the words, depending on the particular context, are important. Very often in the in the UDV, the songs they sing are often about nature, the beauties of nature. So there's these reveries about nature. They often trigger visions of nature. There's also a kind of, with the beat, there's kind of a driving, a rhythmic auditory driving, which can, alter sensorium, create a more of a perhaps a deep meditative state. There are some similarities actually in the electroencephalograms of individuals under the influence of ayahuasca and what you may see in very, very high level meditators, specifically Tibetan meditators. Gamma coherence is the phenomena that's been described. So again, ayahuasca is this fascinating ancient substance used for millennia in the Amazon basin in South America, but only recently has it come to the attention of modern Western science. And although we have conducted some research, and there have been a few other investigators in this country, in Spain, now in South America as well, still we're just scratching the surface. So we know many good questions, but we don't have all of the answers at this point.
What are your questions?
Oh, well, one question of what you would raise, what are the significance of these sounds, but otherwise, what is the basis for this powerful transformative effect that we can observe consistently from ayahuasca tradition to ayahuasca tradition? Why is it that individuals report life-changing experience? This is, really, I think, the most fascinating area. And then there's also what is the neurobiological substrate for the ayahuasca experience? We may have some very initial preliminary answers. My colleague from Finland, Jace Calloway, looked at, in the study we did in '93 in Manaus in Brazil, we collected a great deal of blood samples from both the subjects and the controls. And the subjects, the blood was taken after they had been asked to maintain abstinence from ayahuasca for a month. And Calloway went back to Finland, and in his laboratory he looked at, on the platelets, he looked at serotonin transporter density, and the platelets are thought to be a comparable model for the central nervous system. And what he found was a phenomenon called upregulation, or increased density of these transporters, of these serotonin transporters on the platelets. And if that's translates to what's going on in the central nervous system, it may be the actual or the biologic basis for what is often observed to be an improvement in mood afterwards, perhaps an antidepressant effect, and a very unique model for antidepressant effect. Normally with antidepressants, like with the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, you are blocking the reuptake into the presynaptic neuron of serotonin, creating more available serotonin in the synaptic space. But because there's more available serotonin, you get a downregulation or a lower density of these transporters or receptors. And with ayahuasca, what you don't have a reuptake blockade, rather you have increased density of the transporter, which may be the basis for more effective, more efficient response to the available serotonin that's there. So allowing for improved serotonergic neurotransmission.
And here in the U.S., there is not. You guys are not allowed to do investigation with ayahuasca, right?
No. There have been no approved studies in the U.S. Only in Brazil, in the case of our studies, and in Spain. An investigator there named Jordi Riba has done some very good laboratory investigation. In the United States, it's not been possible to do ayahuasca research. We did our research in Brazil. It was approved in Brazil. There's also been a very productive group in Barcelona in Spain that has had permission to do laboratory studies of ayahuasca. But in the U.S., efforts to get approved studies have not been successful. Perhaps for a couple of reasons. One is it's very hard to begin with to get permission to work with any hallucinogen. I mean, we got permission, but it was with a laboratory synthesized alkaloid, psilocybin in the case of the research we did. With ayahuasca, it's complicated because it's a decoction of two different plants, and there are several alkaloids that are necessary for the ayahuasca to have its effect. Not only the dimethyltryptamine, but also the harmala alkaloids, harmine, harmaline, and tetrahydroharmine are absolutely essential for ayahuasca to be psychoactive. The dimethyltryptamine, or tryptamine rather, when it's taken by itself is inactivated in the gastrointestinal system by the monoamine oxidase enzyme system. But the harmala alkaloids inhibit the monoamine oxidase enzymatic degradation. So taking the harmala along with the DMT allows for absorption of the DMT and central nervous system activation. So, but it's complicated because it's several different alkaloids, and it's also a plant. In the United States, I think there's somewhat of an aversion to working with actual plant compounds. In the United States, our system has preferred to isolate the active alkaloid and then to simply work with that isolated active chemical, as opposed to working with the entire plant compound. Of course, the isolated alkaloid can be somewhat different than the plant. One example is, cocaine is an isolated alkaloid from the coca plant. The coca plant is considered to be relatively non-toxic and actually with beneficial health effects. On the other hand, cocaine, the isolated alkaloid, is notorious for its dangers to people who use it.
But talking about that, since you mention it, about cocaine and the coca plant, why are they, in the United Nations and all that stuff, they were just trying to ban the plant, which is, as you said,
we've had a drug war going now for many decades, and although it started in the United States, it's gone worldwide, and unfortunately, some of the repercussions have been counterproductive. For instance, to ban the coca plant, although it is the source of cocaine, still to ban it and to and to discourage medical investigation lessens the likelihood that we could find or we could learn about its very helpful or beneficial range of effects.
Yeah, of course, because unfortunately, the same with ayahuasca, there are so many people who use it for recreational use,
Right.
and that is the
Right.
problem.
Right.
But like,
With
for instance, poppy seeds, and the poppies, I mean,
Right.
we all eat them here in cakes and all that, but then you can do heroin from those. So,
Right.
what is the difference between cocaine and poppies?
Well, I mean, poppies are not psychoactive, and cocaine is. By the way, there's no recreational use of ayahuasca that has emerged. It's always within ceremony, and ayahuasca has an unusual nature in that it really pushes individuals to do very serious, deep inner work, and it does not lend itself to the frivolity and hedonism that one sees with recreational drugs per se, such as cocaine.
And talking about the meditation stage that you were saying, is this similar to hypnosis? I mean, can you get a similar effect by?
Not entirely. I think one investigator has actually individuals who've taken the drug MDMA in the past. He's put them in a hypnotic trance state, and he says he's been able to facilitate their re-experiencing of the MDMA by, they have that experience in their history. He's able to the hypnosis apparently allows them to recapture that state, but that's the only hypnotic inductive corollary that I see, or that I'm aware of at least.
Tell me about the research that you're doing at the present time, please.
Right. Well, we've actually finished a study in 2008 where we had permission to administer psilocybin, which is the active alkaloid in mushrooms. And the psilocybin we used was synthesized in a laboratory that's under contract with the government to make Schedule I substances for human research. We had permission to administer psilocybin to a group of patients who had advanced cancer and consequent anxiety, or anxiety reactive to the advanced cancer. What we did was, after screening and preparing, the subjects were admitted on 2 separate occasions to our clinical research unit at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. On one occasion they received the psilocybin, which was 0.2 milligram per kilogram body weight dose. On the other occasion they received a placebo. They each received one of each, but the order was randomized. It was also double blind, and obviously placebo control, each subject acting as their own control. And we facilitated a 6-hour psilocybin altered state of consciousness. Myself and my research coordinator Alicia, we sat with our subjects for the entire 6 hours of the experience. We urged them to go as deeply as possible into the visionary state. We checked in every hour, and at the end of the session, when they had returned to normal, we processed what their experiences were. Our subjects often had very profound, very moving inner experience, and afterwards they reported a fairly significant and dramatic alleviation of anxiety. Also, many of them reported an improved mood and an improved quality of life. It did not extend survival. That was not what we were looking for, and I did not see any evidence that it can cure the cancer or anything like that. But it does seem to allow individuals to face head-on the great existential crisis they're going through. There's no greater existential crisis than when individuals have to face their own death. And it seemed to allow them to come to terms with the inevitability of their demise, and to experience a lessening of the psychological burden they were going through. And we found it to be very very valuable. That's what they reported to us, that it improved the quality of their lives for the remaining time. One subject who had become increasingly shut in and avoidant of others, socially isolated. After her experience, she and her husband became more social, reconnected with friends, started going to concerts regularly, which she loved, and making trips, particularly to the San Francisco area where they had friends and liked to travel. So it seemed to really enhance the value of the remaining time she had, and she was not overwhelmed and debilitated by the suffocating anxiety of having this terminal illness.
Oh, did you see any recurring themes from the visions of the people who are close to death with this kind of?
Well, there were a variety of visions that they reported. And there is a literature on this particular area from the 1960s when researchers had permission to work with hallucinogens, and they did a number of studies with people who had terminal cancer, and they found that with those subjects who had a powerful psychospiritual epiphany, a transcendent or transpersonal visionary experience, that these were the individuals who were the most likely to have significant reductions in their anxiety afterwards, and also more likely to have improved mood. Many of our subjects would seem to be doing, their visions often had to do with doing healing work with significant others and with family members. One woman had she was entirely naive to hallucinogens, had never had them, and she also was not, normally people come on to the experience after the first hour or so. She had and this was her second session. I was pretty sure she had had a placebo the first time. So after the first hour, she said, when I checked in, we'd check in at every hour point, do a blood pressure, ask them how they're doing, what's going on. She said, nothing's happening. I said, okay, well, put the eye shades back on, put the headphones back on. We had the music through the headphones, and just go deep into the experience. I checked in at 2 hours, nothing was happening. At 3 hours, nothing was happening. At 4 hours, nothing was happening. And I thought, my God, I wonder if the research pharmacist gave us, by mistake, a placebo on this occasion as well. But then I spoke with, I had one of our psychiatry residents was assisting me on the study, and I had put him in charge of the music selection. I told him, I said, I think you're playing music that's too mellow. Do you have anything with more of an oomph to it, more push, more drive? He said, well, not up here, but down in my car I have Dead Can Dance. And I don't know if you know Dead Can Dance, but it was music from the late 90s with a very incessant driving rhythmic beat, somewhat dissonant, not at all mellow. And I said, oh, that's perfect, go get it. So he raced downstairs, came up with the CD, put it in the CD player, and within a few minutes the floodgates had opened and the tears were just streaming out. And I didn't want to interrupt her, but I imagined what she was going through was coming to terms with her demise, which was likely to happen in the near future. But I waited for the hour point to come, and then I asked her, and I was entirely wrong. What was going on was, she said she was crying because she had been thinking of her father, who had died many years before, and what was going through her mind was how sad it was that she had never been able to tell him how much she loved him while he was still alive. And there was this big release, and it seemed to alleviate a tremendous block she had within herself. So that's one story. Another story is a woman who also went through a lot of crying. Tears came out. She was very quiet, lying there just quietly, not moving, but I could see the tears streaming down her cheeks under the eye mask. And I waited for the hour point, and again I'm thinking she's crying because she's coming to terms with her imminent death. But that, again, I was wrong again. That wasn't the case. Rather, what she was crying about was she was putting herself in the shoes of her husband, and she was experiencing what he would experience after she died. So it was this very powerful empathic resonance or empathic rapport with her husband. And indeed, after the session, she and her husband relationship seemed to have rekindled, and their conflicts were lessened, and she was much more at ease with the reality of her illness, but also far more at ease with her husband. And he became more at ease with her and became less anxious as well. So it had a ripple effect, even impacting the spouse who had not taken the experimental drug at all. Yeah, well, music is very important, within hallucinogen sessions. It would be much more difficult to have a hallucinogen experience without music. Music allows one to flow with the experience. And very often individuals will have visions of moving down a body of water, flowing down the currents of a stream or of a river. It allows them to just move forward and not get hung up, not get stuck. Vibratory experience may be very important, particularly to the ayahuasca level experience. However, we have no scientific evidence at this point, at least that I'm aware of, but there's been minimal attention given to studying these plant compounds in general, and hopefully in the future there'll be more efforts to document the range of auditory experience and to try to understand the underlying biology of that experience.
How do you foresee what is going to happen, like, I don't know, from 20 years with all these plants and all these,
Well,
all this research that you're saying, you're scratching the surface, but...
Right. Yeah, so, when hallucinogens were discovered or rediscovered 50, 60, even almost 70 years ago in the case of Hoffman and LSD, these compounds were perceived as extremely valuable tools for psychiatry and neuroscience and understanding how the brain worked, the mind-brain interface, understanding mental illness, and also were progressively perceived as having perhaps great potential in helping us develop new and novel treatment models, particularly for patients that have conditions for which mainstream treatments are lacking, or effective treatments are lacking. So, this was really seen as the cutting edge of research in the 50s and the 60s, but then because of the cultural reaction, all the cultural upheaval, the political turmoil, hallucinogen research was shut down for a long time. Now we're opening them up again, and we're now just rediscovering how valuable these tools are. And my hope is in 20 years from now, they will be again reestablished as vital probes, vital tools to understand the mind, understand the human condition, help us understand how to facilitate experience that will reduce suffering, that will help individuals lead more productive, healthier, more wholesome lives. My hope would be that there would be psychiatric treatment models, particularly for conditions that are often very, very difficult to treat. First and foremost, the treatment of chronic alcoholism or drug addiction, conditions for which we still do very poorly with in regards to our treatments, but for which there was really compelling indication even going back as far as the late 1950s with Humphrey Osmond, that these compounds had great potential when utilized under optimal conditions to help individuals terminate their addictions to alcohol and to other drugs. Another group I would hope to see more work done would be the kind of work we've been doing, where we were using psilocybin as a treatment model for individuals with overwhelming existential anxiety triggered by their proximity to their own death because of their terminal illness. So we'd like to see this one day as being incorporated as a palliative medicine model to help individuals who are coming to the end of their lives to come to terms with their lives and to experience lessened anxiety and a renewed sense of continuity of their lives, reconnecting with who they were, kind of reconnecting and understanding the thread of their lives, to help them heal the relationships in their lives that need healing. So these would be areas where I would hope these compounds would have be perceived as having a very valuable application. Now, of course, I say this with the understanding, the premise that it would all be above board, sanctioned, approved. When it's done underground, there's all sorts of additive risk that ideally one should avoid. So, looking at the phenomena of genetic memory, some traditions will reflect the degree or the potential of accessing memories that might not be from one's personal history, but more from a genetic history. One example of this is with the African plant hallucinogen iboga. It's used in Gabon in a syncretic religion there, the Bwiti religion, and initiates into the religion who are administered very large amounts of the iboga root, the powder or the scrapings of the iboga root. They're instructed to achieve a memory of an ancestor, and this is what often is reported: ancestral memories. So it may be that these compounds, under conditions which are optimal, and particularly where there's an intention of accessing ancestral memory, that who knows, it may be possible to access ancient memories of our own genetic line. I mean, we know we carry the genetic coding from our ancestors, and although there's no scientific exploration of this phenomena, I think it is a potential that could lend itself to investigation.
What kind of chemistry does this African plant has? What chemistry provokes in the body?
Well, again, it's a bit of an unknown. My understanding is it also affects the serotonergic system, as well as perhaps some other neurotransmitter systems. It induces a rather unique effect, and again, there are consistent reports, not only from the Bwiti itself, about recovery of ancestral memory, but where Europeans or Americans participate in ceremonies using iboga or the alkaloid ibogaine, and they're instructed to tap into ancestral memory. I mean, there are reports. Now, who knows? It could be fantasy, or it could be genuine. This is, there's a bit of it's very hard to replicate this.
One thing that they say is that, and also from what I'm listening, is the affective part of the human being. Marlene Dopkins, she was telling me about the study in Brazil, how they use it to create bonds with the older generation and the younger generation. Right. So this affects really the bonding and what we call love. And between among human beings. How does that happen?
Well, it's you can witness during these ayahuasca sessions multi-generation families participating, and these are very wholesome events, and it does appear to facilitate individuals accessing their healthier functional capacity, which includes the capacity to bond with significant others, to experience loving feelings, to experience being in harmony and peace within oneself and within one, and also with those who are closest to them. So this is an observable fact that one can see. Again, the biologic underpinnings are awaiting further exploration.
Civilizations from the jungle, from all these indigenous tribes that were conquered, could they have known much more scientifically that what we know now in their own ways.
The indigenous people.
Could they have known more, like how to cure certain things, how to use these plants appropriately that we don't know?
I think we're beginning to appreciate there was, amongst the indigenous people who we disparagingly refer to as the primitives. I think we're now perceiving that they had very sophisticated levels of knowledge and ability in many areas, including utilization of healing plants. In fact, it's a great tragedy to humanity that much of the indigenous knowledge of healing plants worldwide has been lost because of our general lack of appreciation that this was important knowledge. The country where there appears to be the greatest level of interest and the highest level of actual research investigation going on is in Spain. Particularly in Barcelona at the university there have been some very significant investigations that have helped contribute to our understanding of the range of effects of ayahuasca.
Where can we find your writings? Do you have books and what your studies, are they published?
Sure, I could give you some articles.
Okay.
Yeah, I can get you copies.
Okay.
Ayahuasca is a fascinating area. For me personally, it's been a very, very fulfilling experience to study ayahuasca, and I feel it holds great potential for the future of humanity and the future of this planet. And one other thing, I think individuals who take ayahuasca report quite often that their awareness and sensitivity to nature has been enhanced. So perhaps one might speculate that the ayahuasca will sensitize individuals to become more aware of the environmental dangers and levels of destruction that have occurred. Another way of looking at this is that the plants that contribute to the creation of ayahuasca, the Banisteriopsis with the DMT, and the Banisteriopsis with the Harmala alkaloids and the Psychotria with the DMT, that these plants are the channels or the vehicles for communication from the earth to humanity. And the consistent message that appears to be conveyed is, wake up, look around, your species is destroying the earth, and if there's any hope for survival of humanity and even life on this planet, and any hope for future generations, you need to reverse this worldwide destruction of the environment that has occurred over centuries now.
Thank you very much.
Okay, sure.